Hi, friends, and welcome back to Kari's Confessions, a nonprofit exec tells all. I'm Kari Anderson, principal with Incite Consulting, where I spend my days helping nonprofits build stronger boards, healthier organizations, and funding models that actually support the mission instead of exhausting the people doing the work, like you. So I spent 25 plus years in the nonprofit sector in leadership roles with 7 organizations. Now I provide coaching and consulting services to ensure that nonprofits, like yours, have the structure, systems, and practices to do your best work. Wherever I go, I continue to hear that nonprofit execs need a space to gather, to receive tools, feedback, and advice that encourages them to stay the course. It doesn't matter if you're in a village of 182 or a metropolis of millions, nonprofit work is both gratifying and lonely. I'm here to make sure that you have a chance to breathe, laugh, smirk, and get excited again about the important work that you do. So today we're talking about something that almost every nonprofit has and very few actually live: values. Now, before you think, oh, great, another conversation about mission, vision, and values, stick with me, because this isn't about creating prettier posters in your lobby. It's about why your values might actually be creating confusion instead of clarity. And more importantly, how to fix it. So a few months ago, I was facilitating a board retreat. Beautiful organization, wonderful people, great mission. Early in the day, I asked everyone to tell me one organizational value they were most proud of. Without hesitation, people started answering: integrity, respect, collaboration, transparency, innovation, compassion. It was exactly what you'd expect. Then I asked one more question. What does collaboration actually look like on Tuesday afternoon? Silence. Finally, someone laughed and said, I don't know. Another person said, I suppose it depends on who's working that day. A board member chimed in, I think staff would probably answer that differently than we would. And then one brave employee smiled and said, they definitely would. The whole room laughed, but that laughter uncovered something really important. They all knew the words. Nobody had agreed on the behaviors. And that's where organizations get into trouble. So here's something I've learned after working with hundreds of nonprofit organizations. Values don't create culture. Behavior creates culture. Let me say that again, because I think it's one of the biggest misconceptions in our sector. Values don't create culture. Behavior creates culture. Culture is simply what happens every day. It's how meetings run. It's how conflict gets handled. It's whether people tell the truth early or wait until there's a crisis. It's whether board members stay in their lane. It's whether deadlines matter. It's whether people feel safe enough to admit mistakes. It's whether everyone gets heard or only the loudest voices. That's culture. And culture is built one interaction at a time, not one strategic planning retreat at a time. I often tell boards culture isn't what you framed on the wall. It's what your newest employee figures out during their first 2 weeks. Think about that. A new employee doesn't learn your culture because someone hands them a value statement. They learn your culture by watching. Can I disagree with my supervisor? Does anyone actually start meetings on time? Do board members email staff directly? What happens when someone makes a mistake? Does accountability apply equally to everyone? Those observations, those tiny moments, that's culture. Years ago, I worked with an organization that proudly listed accountability as one of its core values. Great. They loved talking about accountability. It appeared on their website, their annual report, every fundraising presentation. There was only one problem. Nobody held anyone accountable. Projects were consistently late. Board members skipped meetings. Staff ignored deadlines. Performance reviews rarely happened. When someone didn't do what they promised, everyone simply worked around them. Now, here's what's fascinating. If you asked anyone in that organization, do we value accountability? Every single person would have enthusiastically answered, absolutely. But accountability wasn't actually value. It was a wish. There's a huge difference. Values only become real when they change behavior. I think nonprofits sometimes fall into the trap of believing that saying something often enough makes it true. Kind of like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz. There's no place like home. There's no place like home. We're collaborative. We're innovative. We're transparent. Maybe, maybe not. The better question is, how would an outsider know? If I followed your staff around for 2 days, could I identify your values simply by watching how people behave? That's the test. Here's the knot I want us to untangle today. Many organizations spend months writing values and almost no time defining behaviors. That's backwards, people. Because people can't consistently do what you've never clearly described. Imagine coaching a basketball team. You wouldn't tell the players, go be excellent. Rad. You'd teach them how to dribble, how to pass, how to defend, how to communicate, specific behaviors. Nonprofits should work exactly the same way. One of my favorite coaching questions is incredibly simple. What does that actually look like? Let's pretend one of your values is integrity. Wonderful. Now tell me, what does integrity actually look like on a Wednesday afternoon? Does it mean telling a donor bad news before they discover it themselves? Probably. Does it mean admitting you missed a grant deadline? Absolutely. Does it mean saying, I don't know, but I'll find out, instead of pretending you have all the answers? Definitely. See the difference? Integrity stopped being a word, it became observable behavior. So let's try another one. Collaboration. Everybody loves collaboration. Until collaboration means someone disagrees with your idea. Then suddenly, not so much. What if collaboration actually meant we send agendas 48 hours before meetings? We invite program staff into conversations that affect their work. We don't make decisions in the parking lot after the meeting. We assume positive intent. We solve problems with people, not about people. Now, collaboration isn't fuzzy anymore. It's visible. It's measurable. It's teachable. One of the biggest mistakes I see organizations make is trying to operationalize every value all at once. Please don't do that. It's exhausting. And frankly, nobody remembers 12 priorities. Pick one, just one. Ask yourself, where's the friction right now? What keeps coming up in exit interviews? That's presuming you're doing exit interviews, by the way. What do we keep arguing about at our board meetings? Where do donors quietly seem concerned? What's frustrating staff? Whatever answer keeps appearing, there's probably a value hiding underneath it. That's where you begin. Not because the other values don't matter, because focus matters. I'll give you an example. I worked with an organization where staff repeatedly complained about communication. The board kept saying, we just need better communication. You know what I discovered? Communication wasn't actually the issue. The issue was courage. People weren't willing to have uncomfortable conversations. Instead, they veered sideways, right? Hallway conversations, parking lot conversations, text messages, private emails, everything except direct conversations. The value wasn't communication. The missing behavior was courage. Once they figured that out, everything changed. One of the simplest exercises I use with organizations is something called start, stop, continue. If we really lived our value of respect, what would we start doing? What would we stop doing? What should we continue doing? The conversations that come out of this exercise are incredible. People suddenly see things they've stopped noticing, like interrupting each other or showing up late or making decisions before meetings instead of during meetings. Those aren't personality problems, they're behavior patterns, and behavior patterns can change. So, I want to talk about where values actually come alive, because here's the secret. They don't come alive in strategic plans. They come alive in hiring, in meetings, in board governance, and even in fundraising. And believe it or not, your values have a direct impact on your organization's revenue. So we talked about the difference between values and behaviors. Now let's talk about where those behaviors actually live. Because here's something I wish every nonprofit board and executive director understood. Culture isn't built during your annual retreat. Culture is built in the systems you repeat every single week. If your systems don't reinforce your values eventually disappear. So let's start with hiring. I've lost track of how many times I've heard someone say, "We hired someone who just wasn't a good fit." Now, sometimes that's true. But often, what actually happened is that nobody ever defined what fit meant. I was working with an organization several years ago that told me they valued accountability. Again, right? Great. Then I asked them one interview question. Show me where your interview for accountability. Show me where you interview for it. Like, silence. Absolute silence. Didn't even dawn on them. They weren't. Every interview was about technical skills. Can you run QuickBooks? Can you manage volunteers? Can you write grants? Can you supervise staff? All important, but nobody during the interview asked, "Tell me about a time you had to deliver difficult feedback." Or, "Tell me about a commitment you made that you couldn't keep. What happened?" Or, "Describe a time you admitted a mistake before someone else found it." Those questions reveal behavior. And behavior predicts culture far better than resumes do. I often tell clients, you can teach someone how to use your donor database. You can teach someone your accounting software. It's much harder to teach someone to value transparency if they spent 20 years avoiding difficult conversations. That's why values have to show up before someone gets hired, not after. The next place that values either come alive or quietly die is meetings. Can I confess something? I spend an embarrassingly amount of my time in my consulting life talking about meetings. Ugh. Because meetings are where organizations reveal themselves. You can tell me your organization values collaboration. Then I attend one board meeting, and watch one person dominate the discussion for 45 minutes. Well, now I know. You can tell me your organization values respect. Then I watch people checking email while someone is presenting. You know who you are. Now I know. You can tell me your board values stewardship. Then I watch them spend 25 minutes debating the color of the annual report instead of discussing fundraising strategy. Now I know. Meetings don't lie. One of the simplest things I recommend is creating meeting norms. Not complicated. Just 3 or 4 commitments. Things like we disagree directly and respectfully. We assume positive intent. We leave every meeting knowing who owns what. We don't reopen decisions unless there's new information. Simple, but powerful. Because now everyone knows what good behavior looks like. Here's another confession. Sometimes organizations tell me, "Kari, we have communication problems." And I smile because communication problems are usually accountability problems wearing a fake mustache. Think about it. If nobody follows through, people say communication is the issue. If nobody owns decisions, people say communication is the issue. If everyone leaves meetings with different understandings, people say communication is the issue. Most of the time, communication isn't broken. Clarity is. Now, let's talk about boards. Oh, boards. You know I love boards. You know. I also know they can unintentionally create some of the biggest culture problems inside a nonprofit organization, not because they're bad people. Quite the opposite. Most nonprofit board members are generous. They're accomplished. They care deeply. They volunteer because they believe in the mission. But nobody ever taught them how nonprofit governance actually works. And that's not their fault. I can't tell you how many board members I've met who genuinely believe they were being helpful by emailing staff directly, by giving volunteers instructions, by changing fundraising materials, by making promises to community partners. They weren't trying to undermine the executive director. They simply didn't understand the behavioral expectation. This is why I say clarity is kind. Don't just tell your board that integrity matters. Tell them what integrity looks like. It means reading the board packet before the meeting. It means asking thoughtful questions instead of surprise questions. It means declaring conflicts of interest. It means speaking with one voice once the board has made a decision, even if your preferred option didn't win. That's integrity. One of my favorite board agreements is incredibly simple. We debate vigorously inside the boardroom, and we support the decision outside the boardroom. Imagine what that one sentence could eliminate for you. No more parking lot lobbying. No more side conversations. No more board members quietly telling staff, well, I didn't really agree with that vote. Healthy governance isn't unanimous agreement. It's unified leadership. Now, let's talk about something people usually don't connect to organizational values: fundraising. Because values and revenue are deeply connected. Donors notice consistency. They notice when promises are kept. They notice when board members all tell the same story. They notice when staff work well together. They notice when leadership is stable. And they definitely notice when it isn't. Years ago, I worked with an organization that was struggling with major donor retention. Everyone assumed they needed a better fundraising strategy, more asks, more events, better marketing. Instead, we discovered donors were experiencing something entirely different. One donor said, I love the mission. I just don't know who's actually leading. Ouch. The problem wasn't fundraising. The problem was organizational behavior. Once leadership clarified roles, improved communication, created stronger board governance, and consistently followed through, donor confidence increased. Fundraising improved. Nothing magical happened. Trust happened. I tell boards all the time, people don't invest in chaos, they invest in confidence. Confidence grows from consistency. Consistency grows from behavior. Behavior grows from clearly defined values. See how they're all connected? Now, let's talk about the hard part, holding the line. Because this is where leadership becomes leadership. It's relatively easy to create values. It's much harder to defend them. Sometimes living your values sounds like this. I'm going to stop you there because that's not how we speak about our community partners. Or, I know this deadline has slipped several times and we need to talk about why. Or, I understand you're frustrated, but I need you to have that conversation directly with your colleague instead of with everyone else. Those aren't comfortable conversations. They're leadership conversations. I think one of the biggest myths in nonprofit leadership is that kindness means avoiding conflict. Nonsense. It doesn't. Kindness means having honest conversations before resentment builds. Kindness means being clear. Kindness means helping people succeed. Avoidance isn't kindness. Avoidance is simply delayed discomfort, usually with interest. I often remind executive directors every difficult conversation you postpone becomes 3 conversations later. Every difficult conversation you postpone becomes 3 conversations later. One with yourself, one with someone else who's now frustrated, and eventually the conversation you should have had in the first place. You don't save energy by avoiding conflict. You simply move it. So here's something I'd love for you to do this week. Whether you're an executive director, a board chair, a department manager, or even a volunteer leader, choose one value, just one value, not your whole list, one. Then finish this sentence. If we truly live this value, we would fill in the blank. Write 3 behaviors, observable behaviors, not intentions, not feelings, behaviors. Then finish another sentence. If we truly live this value, we would no longer fill in the blank. Write 2 or 3 things you'd stop doing. Maybe it's, we won't gossip. We won't make decisions without the people affected. We won't surprise each other. We won't agree in meetings and disagree afterwards. Those statements create incredible clarity. Then ask one final question. Where does this behavior belong? Should it become part of onboarding, performance reviews, board meetings, volunteer orientation, your weekly staff meeting? Because here's the truth. Values don't implement themselves. People do. Systems do. Consistency does. Before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final thought. After working with hundreds of nonprofits across the country, I've noticed something remarkable. The healthiest organizations are rarely the ones with the biggest budgets, or the fanciest offices, or the most famous CEOs. They're usually the organizations where people know exactly what's expected of them. They trust one another. They have difficult conversations respectfully. They hold each other accountable with grace. And they keep showing up day after day, living the same values they proudly print in their annual report. Not because they're perfect, because they're intentional. So this week, instead of asking your team, what are our values? Try asking, what behavior would prove we're actually living them? I promise. The conversation that follows will be far more interesting and probably far more productive. Thanks for spending part of your day with me. If today's conversation made you think about your own organization, I'd love for you to share this episode with another nonprofit leader, board chair, or executive director. These are the conversations that build healthier organizations, and healthier organizations change communities. Until next time, keep building healthy, keep building vibrant, keep building visionary, and remember, nonprofits don't become extraordinary because they have perfect people. They become extraordinary because ordinary people consistently choose behaviors that reflect their values. I'm Kari Anderson, and this has been Kari's Confessions, a nonprofit exec tells all. We'll see you next week. Be sure to find me on your favorite streaming platforms, and for more tips and tools, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at inciteconsultinggroup.com.